this computer. All right.
Thank you for letting us record this.
Oh, sure.
This way we'll put it on our website and more people get to see it who couldn't make it tonight.
Okay,
Great.
so Kristin, you can share screen now, I think. Do you have the button?
Yep.
There we go.
See my screen?
Yes.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Get that bergamot.
Thank you so much, Don. Very kind words. My goodness, that's like the best
Well deserved.
introduction I have ever had. Oh, thank you so much. I need to make some room here on my screen with my things here. Well, anyway, thank you so much for having me this evening. It's very kind of you, and I'm always look for opportunities to share what I'm passionate about. I hope I don't go on too long today. I know I've got a lot of slides, so some of them I'll go through a little bit quicker so that we can actually have more of a discussion in the last 15 minutes of our hour. So we're going to talk about nature-friendly landscapes and what it means to take that ecological approach to our landscapes for the sake of clean water, healthy yards for people, pets, and wildlife. Since 1970, we've lost 3 billion birds. That means in the last 50 years, 29% of the breeding birds in North America have vanished. 432 species of North American birds are threatened with extinction, and 70 species are at the tipping point. Worldwide, more than 40% of our insect species are in decline. A third are at risk of extinction, and 25% of our native wild bee species here in the US are at risk of extinction. And the primary causes are habitat destruction and fragmentation, pesticide use, development, invasive species, and a changing climate. And of course, that latter one, we don't even know. That's kind of like a wild card on how it's going to really affect many of the species. This is the 5th year for APCC issuing a State of the Waters Cape Cod report. We just finalized it at the end of last year. It's a report that looks at all of the water quality data collected by other groups across Cape Cod. And we look at all that water quality data, we apply assessments, and we grade the water bodies, the coastal embayments and the freshwater ponds, and our drinking water sources. All of this information is on capecodwaters.org with interactive maps, and it's pretty text heavy, but it's all there, and hopefully in a way that is more usable for the average person to kind of get a handle on what the water quality is on Cape Cod. And so we produce these maps. There are interactive maps, but we also have these static maps. And the findings of this last report is that 90% of the Cape's coastal embayments have unacceptable water quality. And this is due to excess nutrients, primarily nitrogen. 37% of the freshwater ponds on Cape Cod have unacceptable water quality. This is for those 139 ponds for which we have water quality data. We have 890 ponds, but clearly we don't have enough data to look at all of them. And in our ponds, our excess nutrients are again from wastewater, stormwater runoff, and fertilizer use. Wastewater on the Cape is 80% of our nutrient problem. And this map just depicts how many of our developed how much of the Cape is developed with lots that are on septic systems. And the black denotes those small areas that are sewered. So this is the big conundrum for us on Cape Cod, is getting the nitrogen out of our wastewater and dealing with that. And APCC has been working very hard in a lot of different avenues to try to help move this whole wastewater planning and implementation forward. And we've made some good progress. The remaining 20% of our nutrient problem is from untreated stormwater runoff and fertilizer use. It's a lovely picture. Hopefully you don't see any of this in your ponds to this degree, but this is a cyano bloom in Harwich. On Cape Cod, nearly 6 million pounds of fertilizers and 1.3 million pounds of pesticides are applied annually. That was by a report from the Cape Cod Commission 10 years ago now. And before we think it's all of our golf courses on Cape Cod, over 80% of that is attributed to residential use. And the stormwater runoff, the issues with stormwater runoff are really start with not only development of roads and parking lots and more houses and more driveways and such, but the fact that the old way of dealing with stormwater was just to convey it away. So a lot of our stormwater systems are still across Cape Cod. Our water is directed off of roadways and off of boat ramps down into surface waters of ponds or coastal or the ocean. So not only are we dumping dirty water into our surface waters, but we're throwing a lot of fresh water away into the ocean that's better filtered into the ground to recharge our aquifer here on Cape Cod. Along with stormwater runoff that's not controlled properly, you get the picture that you see here. The water is running off the road, picking up speed, particularly in these big, heavy rainstorms we've been getting of late, of the recent years, and will continue to get these heavy rainstorms due to climate change. Our systems are easily overwhelmed because they were designed for rainfall of back in the 1960s. So the rainwater picks up speed, flows up and over the road, down over this unvegetated bank, pulling sediment with it. There's a pond to the right off the screen. So all of the water that flows over there, the dirty water that has just washed the road, comes over the bank, picks up sediment. There are contaminants attached to those sediments as well, never mind the sediments filling into the pond. So this stormwater is a significant issue that towns need to clean and work at. So all of those issues, our landscapes play a role in trying to address those. We do have some control. While the wastewater thing is huge and looming for us, and for you too, it sounds, that's a big issue that is out of really each of our, well, we're all voters and we can all speak up for things, but what we have control over is our own yards. And so there are things that we can do in our landscape that can help with all of these concerns. So by choosing nature-friendly landscape designs and best land care practices, we can help improve and protect our water quality and support nature. And this is the message that I particularly and APCC try to convey. So part of the problem started back in the 50s, and this is a postcard from the 50s. As you can see, it's advertising lawn, and the industry was just getting start then. The Department of Agriculture was suddenly now able to give technical advice to the lawn industry, and we had cheap chemicals for fertilizers and pesticides. We were bringing in exotic plants from all around the world for their horticultural interest. And this is what we were all learning to aspire to. Big green lawns, cool exotic plants from somewhere else, and maybe you get that big home to go with it. This is kind of what everybody's mindset is for the last now 75 years, is that this is unfortunately our social view of what landscapes look like, but we know that that's not as healthy for us today. So the issue is trying to get folks to look at their landscapes a little bit differently, because we can choose to shift from this old landscape paradigm to something that is more ecologically friendly. We know now that nutrients are an issue. We know the health impacts of pesticide use and other chemicals. So it's taking a fresh look at our landscapes and really thinking about what their role is. I love this quote by Neil Dibble. He's a native plant ecologist. Everybody says they love Mother Nature, but if you look at people's yards, very few actually invite her over. Now, this is kind of like an aha moment it was for me many years ago when I read a book by Doug Tallamy. I think we there's a little disconnect. We think about nature being down the road and at the state park or the national seashore or some other protected area, but really nature is all around us. And this is why our landscapes can really make a difference if we make that connection. We'd rather to see our landscapes like this. This was our garden at the office one year. It was full of life. It was so inspiring to me. It's a wonderful thing to have. I really enjoy the diversity of plants in so many ways. It's not just the color diversity, but the textures and the fact that it is full of life, full of pollinators and all sorts of insects. So a nature-friendly landscape, the cornerstone is really native plants. And the general broad, I'm sure you all know, but plants in general, they are the basis for life. They alone can grasp the energy from the sun and make it available for all other living things. This catbird needs to eat insects or needs to eat plants to survive. It cannot take the energy from the sun and do anything with it. This is all about how life exists on the earth. So plants are really important, but as I'm going to talk about now, native plants are even more important. And I call native plants the true proven winners. So for any of you who are retail nursery addicts and you buy plants on a regular basis, you know that proven winners trademark name. But native plants are really the true proven winners because they're well adapted to their ecoregion. And as you can see, Cape Cod and Plymouth County are in the same ecoregion. Many of our native species are drought tolerant. They do well in really nutrient poor soils, so they don't need fertilizer or additives to the soil. And many are salt spray tolerant, so they're pretty hardy. This beach plum is just quintessential for our region. It does really well in dunes. It's a pretty harsh environment when you think about a dune setting. You've got all of that, drought and poor soils and salt spray. And yet these shrubs thrive, they flower, and in a good year, you're going to get a heavy set of fruit like we did this last summer. Spotted bee balm is indigenous to Plymouth County, and this is a great drought-tolerant perennial. I think it's pretty cool looking too. It's very unique. It grows, again, very well in poor soils. It's a super plant in drought. When we had those horrible drought summers these last few years, not this past summer, but the summers before, this plant did really well, and the pollinators absolutely love it. So native plants have this great ecological value, and of course, this is really what does it for me. It's continually amazes me, some of the relationships of insects and birds, of course, too, with native plants. Insects and plants co-evolved over thousands and thousands and sometimes millions of years, and they have very specialized relationships. And hopefully children today, just as when we went to school, know that one of those examples is when plants, they entice pollinators with food, with nectar and pollen, so that they will be able to produce seed for the next generation. So one simple generalized relationship, but there are so many more complex ones. In particular, host plants. This is a really important concept to realize, that insects depend on plants for their life cycle, and they can be very specialized. So these swallowtails, the spicebush swallowtail, may be getting nectar from any plant. Maybe it's a non-native butterfly bush, but she's going to be looking for spicebush or sassafras on which to lay her egg because her caterpillar can only eat those two shrubs. The eastern swallowtail caterpillar has a little broader diet, so she's going to look for wild black cherry, birch, and tulip tree. So think about what's in your yard, what's in your neighbor's yard, or in your neighborhood. If you don't have any of those shrubs around, you're never going to see these butterflies because you need to have their caterpillars to have the butterflies. Now, the poster child for host plants and that insect or butterfly plant relationship is the monarch butterfly. Again, she can get nectar from most any plant that's offering nectar, but she's going to be looking for milkweed on which to lay her eggs because her caterpillar can only eat the milkweed. Now, if you know milkweed, if you know this plant, this is the common milkweed. So probably any of you who are old enough like me know that the sap in this plant, if you break it, it's really sticky. And this particular plant you would see in old fields or maybe abandoned corners or parking lots that are gravelly parking lots. We don't see it as much anymore. It's been agricultural fields are few and far between, or they've been eradicated with pesticides. But this milkweed plant grows to be about 3 to 4 feet tall. It has runners, and as I say, the sap is really sticky, and you don't want to get it on your hands. It also is filled with cardioglycosides, which are a toxin, toxic to vertebrates, will make them very ill. And the chemical also is meant to, to fend off herbivory. But the monarch caterpillar has been able to figure out a workaround again over those many thousands of years of evolution. And one of the things that the caterpillar has learned to do is to avoid that sticky sap in its mandibles. It has learned a behavior to break the stem or the main vein of a leaf so that it can eat away very conveniently without that sap flowing. Now, I didn't even realize until much later after looking at this video that I took that that's exactly what this caterpillar had done. It's on swamp milkweed. It had broken the stem. So you notice the stem is hanging down. And so the sap is no longer flowing into that leaf, which makes it much easier for the caterpillar to eat. And those cardiac glycosides, the caterpillar has been able to metabolize that, that toxin, and then in turn, it makes the caterpillar distasteful to other predators that might want to eat the monarch caterpillar. These are some of our milkweeds. There are other additional milkweeds that are native to our area, but these are the ones that you would most likely use in your garden. The common milkweed, again, as I say, is runners. It's kind of needs a wild and crazy place to grow, like the end of my driveway, as opposed to an English garden. You do not want it there. But the butterfly milkweed is very well behaved. It's more compact, does great, super drought resistant. The rose milkweed likes a little bit more of a moister garden or maybe a few hours of shade. And the world milkweed is typically found in a field situation. But milkweeds are not for monarchs only. This is a tussock milkweed moth, and this is the caterpillar of it, and there's the moth. I always think it looks like somebody's little crochet project. But this insect also has a relationship with milkweed. It needs milkweed as part of its life cycle. These are some other insects that make use of milkweed. The milkweed bugs. The beetle in the middle is a leaf beetle that's is specific to swamp milkweed. And that was really fantastic when I identified it, because that's exactly where I took the picture. It was on a swamp milkweed. And then the little oleander aphids on the right with the monarch caterpillar, they show up every year on milkweed. They are not a native insect, but they don't do any harm. They're just sucking the juices from the plant, as do these other insects. Never should be concerned about seeing them. They're not going to kill the plant. They're just doing their thing, and they're probably food for somebody else. So this is the book that really changed my life back in 2007 when it came out. Doug Tallamy is an entomologist and an advocate for native plants now. And he really put together the, again, the light bulb went on in my brain, and many others, looking at the science of native plants and the relationships with insects, in particular Lepidoptera, moths, and butterflies. He has written 2 more books, again, really making the case for native plants and our need to appreciate native plants and to make sure that we keep them in our landscapes. Excuse me. So I would recommend any of these books. He is an excellent communicator, and if you ever get an opportunity to hear him speak or look him up online, he has a lot of videos out there. But bringing the science together with native plants and the value to our insects and to the food webs, and how we really need to protect our native plants, but also make sure that we bring them into our landscapes as well, our managed landscapes. So one of the things he did is he looked at native plants versus non-native plants and looked at Lepidoptera, moths and caterpillars, and how many different species they supported. And hands down, our native plants and our native insects know each other. And so for oak trees, there were over 530 species of moth and butterfly caterpillars on an oak tree, whereas a non-native plant like a ginkgo or a Bradford pear or a Coosa dogwood would support none or only a couple. In fact, oak trees are really a keystone species. They're the basis of our ecosystems, particularly after we lost our American chestnut. The oak trees kind of filled that niche. So they're extremely important. We take them for granted here in our area because they're everywhere, but they're extremely important. Willow trees are also very important. Over 450 species of moths and butterflies rely on them. Of course, it's a great pollinator plant in early spring. Same with our black cherry, which often people think is weedy and they want to get rid of it, but it supports over 450 species of moths and butterflies. And so we need to keep those in our landscape. And for cranberries and huckleberries, another really important shrub group in our region, over 250 species of moths and butterflies. So why is that so important? Well, these guys really look forward to those caterpillars. They need them. These are baby chickadees, and their parents are going to be very busy trying to feed those little mouths. They go out first thing in the morning. They take turns. They both feed the babies, the male and the female. They go back and forth to the nest every 3 minutes with caterpillars predominantly. And so they don't have time to fly a mile down the road to find caterpillars. They need to be within a very short distance to that nest. And so they're going to feed those little mouths caterpillars for up to 2 weeks until they fledge. And even after they fledge, as we know, adult birds will still feed their babies for a while. So it's about calculated to be upwards of 9,000 caterpillars just for this one little nest of 2, 4, 5 birds, 6 birds there to be raised to the point that they're on their own. So 9,000 caterpillars for one nest of chickadees. But it's not just chickadees that depend on caterpillars. They're really an important source of food for all baby birds. 96% of our terrestrial birds feed their young caterpillars. I love this photo of the kestrel feeding its baby. Never in my wildest dreams did while I might understand 96% of terrestrial birds, I never would have thought a bird of prey might be feeding its young a caterpillar. And then, of course, those caterpillars, the moths and butterflies, 90% of them require native plants. So if we want to feed our birds and help support those bird populations that are really struggling, we need to provide caterpillars, which means we need to provide more native plants and preserve native plants in our areas. And as we know, these are what our typical, that old traditional landscape looks like. And we still, of course, see these today. This is what the social view of what our attractive landscape is, our expansive lawns, a lot of hydrangeas, Bradford pear in the top left there. it's what we've socially been trained and marketed to. So we need to change the way we think, because these landscapes dominated by turf lawn and non-native species are really a wasteland for wildlife. There are no chickadees that are going to be able to survive on these landscapes. So when we think about when we lose habitat to development, it's not just the homes or the buildings or the driveways, it's our landscapes that are also causing loss and fragmentation of habitat unless we make some changes. So what happens when you don't have host plants for caterpillars? Well, Dr. Desiree Narango actually did a study on this. There's a study in the suburban Maryland neighborhood, and they found the survival rate of baby chickadees severely declined in landscapes with less than 70% native plants. So again, think about your yard, your neighbor's yard, your neighborhood. Do you have 70% native plants? Optimally, you'd like to have 94 to 100% to make sure that chickadees could actually, the population could actually survive. Now, remember, it's not just chickadees that depend on caterpillars. So think about all those other birds, you know, the titmice, the, oh, I don't know, think of any other birds that, the cardinals, the robins. Robins are going to eat some worms, sure, but caterpillars are really important for, again, that 96% of our bird species. So this is a Facebook post, but I just love this photo, and it comes around every once in a while. So I always have to use it because it's so true. If something's not eating your plants, then your garden's not part of the ecosystem. We've gotten to be so uptight. And again, I think it's kind of our the whole social thing and the whole marketing about what our landscape should look like, that they should be neat as a pin, and heaven forbid there's a broken leaf or something or a little hole. And so if we're really trying to think about how our landscapes can fit into a healthy environment, we have to look at them differently and allow for some insect nibbling. So I know we wanted to talk a little bit about ponds. So I've got a lot of slides here, kind of all putting two talks together, but around our ponds, these vegetative buffers and having natural and native vegetation is really important. So this is a pond in my town where there was a little stretch here where it was all natural. This is goldenrod, and there's some switchgrass. I don't know what else, but you know, a nice full vegetated shoreline here. And this is really important for what goes on in the pond. So fish found in lakes with undeveloped shorelines are healthier than those lakes that are developed. Sort of makes sense, doesn't it? Terrestrial insects comprise up to 100% of the diet of fish in undeveloped lakes. In contrast, 2% in developed lakes. And this pattern was apparent at the regional and national scale. So there's a connection here between, I mean, everybody thinks like whatever's living in the pond is just eating what's in the pond. Well, it's not true, not entirely true. So when you have a shoreline like this, a lot of that vegetation is now gone because it's been trampled into oblivion. So the only thing that's remaining here is some switchgrass. 40% of food proteins for fish is from insects that drop from the native vegetation around the pond. So in that previous picture, great, you know, you've got trees around a pond, got those oak trees, perhaps some caterpillars are falling in there. There are other insects that fall from the native vegetation. When we trample and lose our vegetation around the pond, we're losing fish food, essentially. So I just thought this was really an important way to see how our shorelines around our ponds connect with healthy pond life. The state of Vermont did some work on how to protect their lakes and water quality and also the wildlife. And so I thought this was a very interesting thing they put together about vegetation around shorelines. The vegetation filters and cleans dirty runoff from upland uses, As I said before, we've got stormwater that runs over. If it's not filtered by vegetation, it causes erosion and pollution into the pond. Lakeshore vegetation provides shoreland and shallow water habitat. It stabilizes banks and it increases lake aesthetics. So that, look at this chart, and I don't know if you can make it out on your screen, so I'll read a few of them. They determined through studies that shoreline stability needed at least 15 feet of lakeshore vegetation around the edge for shoreline stability. 100 feet was better. 250 feet would be the best. Shoreline habitat, 25 feet is necessary. 100 feet is good. 250 feet is even better. Nutrient removal, 50 feet is necessary. 250 feet would be good. 500 would be optimum. Sediment filtration, 50 feet is necessary, absolutely necessary. 250 would be good. 500 is even better and optimum. Fish and aquatic insects, they would like at least 100 feet of vegetation around the pond. Again, for that example I just used about how insects fall into the lake from native vegetation. Creatures, mammals, birds, salamanders, they all need these really important, these are important transition areas between the upland and the pond to have these vegetated areas. And so look at all of those. You know, the state of Vermont said, okay, 250, we think that's as much as we can get. This is what this is showing me. But optimally, you'd like to look at over 600 feet of vegetation from the shoreline so that animals have a place to conduct their life. Frogs would really like to have 1,200 feet. I think that's pretty incredible. Guess the state of Vermont didn't think too much about salamanders, turtles, snakes, and frogs, but they really need to have hundreds of feet of vegetation around a pond, again, for their life cycles. So this is what a shoreline around one of the ponds in my town looks like. If you're a botanist, you might be able to pick out some of those plants. There's boneset, there's woolgrass, there's some rose tick seed in the bottom right. And as I say, these areas are really important transition areas, not only for these, to support these unique plant communities that grow around our ponds, but also for fellas like these turtles. So snapping turtle, we know, happy in the pond, but she needs to come out and lay her eggs in the upland somewhere. The stink pot or the musk turtle needs a place to overwinter, and they're going to come up and look for a log or some place to crawl under. They're in the pond all summer, but they need an upland place to overwinter and a safe place. So the vegetation around a pond is extremely important for so many creatures. So for folks who live along a pond side, along the pond itself, or lucky enough to have shorefront like that, a pond side landscape, here's a depiction of what an ideal landscape would be. Skipping the lawn treatments and embracing a natural lawn would be really key. We don't need to be having fertilizers and nutrients flowing down that slope to the pond. You need as much vegetation as possible just to maintain the soils and whatever's coming down in the rainfall and to help filter that. So we really need to skip the lawn treatments. They're not good for our waterways. And natural lawns are really just the way we need to think about things. You know, we always say have a Cape Cod lawn. Other parts of the country call them freedom lawns and mosaic lawns. So there's a real movement towards just really getting rid of the lawn treatments. It's really a kind of passé. It's an old way of looking at how lawns should be managed. Paths to the pond should be angled or serpentine. This is a really important thing that maybe, you know, folks don't necessarily think about. You know, you want to get right down to the pond, so you're going to have your path straight down. But if it's angled, it will help minimize stormwater runoff. If your path is straight down, you're going to get erosion, or you're going to at least convey stormwater down over the slope right into the pond, and you really want vegetation to be able to capture it and slow it down and filter out any sediments or impurities before the water soaks into the ground or gets to the pond. Reduce the lawn area is always a great thing, and have more native species. Remember those buffer distances. I think we'd be hard pressed in many of our ponds where we've got developed properties to think that we could have 600 feet of naturalized vegetation, but that is, we need to strive for as much vegetative buffers around our ponds as possible. And of course, enhance and preserve that buffer as best we can. And this is an example of what a homeowner on a pond in Falmouth has worked on. They had a lawn down to the pond and realized that that was not a good idea. So they've been adding back that natural buffer. Fortunately, they have a big tupelo there on the left, which is lovely. And they've added back a bunch of natives, and they've made it more into a garden of what they want, but they're native plants, native perennials. They've tried to sort of, narrow down their path and reduce lawns. So I think this is just a great example of what a vegetative buffer can look like. And of course, these vegetative buffers are so important for birds. It's not only for water quality, but birds really like this area too. And so looking at layers, birds nest at different heights. So trees and shrubs and perennials are all important in that vegetative buffer. So stormwater runoff can happen over lawns. And this is an example of a sloping lawn, which is on either side of the road here, clearly irrigated, and I would say chemically treated lawns. When we get a heavy rain, or even when somebody's over irrigating, you can get runoff onto the road. Those chemicals get taken with them. And of course, if there's water getting onto the road and a heavy rain that's coming off this property, it's just contributing to a big slug of stormwater at the low point somewhere. So vegetative buffers around ponds are important, but they're also important around the edge of your property. We should always try to avoid what you see in the picture here, which is lawn right to the edge of pavement. A planted berm or garden or shrub, something that would sort of stop or rechannel the water to stay on the property is what would be ideal. Another way to manage that stormwater upward on the property, capture it where it's coming from. And our roofs are producing a lot of it. Sometimes it's our driveways, but if you're around a pond, it's likely going to be your house or your patio. If it's your house, you can capture rainwater in rain barrels. You can get really fancy and capture it into a big system of multiple rain barrels or maybe a cistern. This is a great way to make use of that water in those drought times. These are 55-gallon drums, which we have had a program for several years now. These are repurposed food barrels, and so the water is captured. You can use it in your flower pots and all of that, and then you can also direct it to where you want it to go and not have it directly discharged down a slope to the pond. Rain gardens are another way to capture the stormwater off your roof. There's a whole talk on this, but this is basically what a rain garden is. It's just a depression in a garden in a depression where the roof runoff is directed. Doesn't have to be anything fancy, but make sure you plant it with native plants so that you also benefit pollinators. This is how we manage stormwater at our office. We have a rain garden, which is over here to the, we don't even notice it. It blends right in with the rest of the landscape. But we had to put in a handicap parking space. And so as an alternative to asphalt, we put in porous pave, which is a permeable surface. It allows the water to soak right into the ground. So we don't have any puddling. The water doesn't get directed out onto the road or anything else. It just, it's a terrific way to manage stormwater. And this is called green infrastructure. It's a method of green infrastructure that allows stormwater to soak right into the ground. And that is the goal. There's some other materials. This is a permeable concrete called percrete. It works the same way. As you can see in the photo there on the left, the water flows right through it. It's not going to run off down to the road and contribute to the bigger community stormwater issue. The goal, again, is to keep the stormwater on the site and have it soak into the ground as much as we can where the water falls, where the rain falls. These are some other surfaces. Don't necessarily think that they always look so terrific, but you can use these concrete blocks. We've used them at a boat ramp filled with gravel. Not so good at growing grass between it on Cape Cod because we do get those hot summers. But these other ways where you can have a parking area that's permeable, but yet function for parking. And of course, permeable pavers. These are pretty popular. Unfortunately, most contractors install them improperly. They put blue stone dust beneath them, which makes them not permeable because it's the spaces between the blocks where the water needs to soak into the ground. And if they use blue stone dust, that basically turns into like concrete when it gets wet and the water doesn't soak through it. So all of these materials need to be placed on like 10 to 12 inches of compacted 3/4 inch stone for the water to actually soak into the ground and function the way these applications are supposed to. And the other issue with stormwater is catch basins can often look like this. They stop functioning properly. They get filled with sediment and other debris. So we need to keep an eye on those, particularly around our ponds, because when they fill up like this, it means the water is going somewhere else and perhaps it's going where it shouldn't be going. This is just an example of a neighborhood where all of the stormwater is coming down that road. You can see all the sediment on the road. Street sweeping is a really important way to keep our stormwater clean, to have a regular street sweeping protocol or maintenance, particularly if you're on private roads. It's something for a neighborhood association to really kind of put as a priority. It's not a fancy thing to do, but it's a good thing to do for, in this particular case, just to the left there, this is where the stormwater is being directed into this entrapment area, and then there's a pond right there on the left. So this is, it's doing its job. It's capturing the sediment. However, it's not been maintained. And so you can see that there's been overflow because there's so much sediment in that catchment system that there's been overflow and it's eroded the edge of the pond. So this is what you don't want to see and why managing our stormwater systems are so important, keeping them clean. And I don't know about your area, but we have a lot of private roads on the Cape, and neighborhood associations don't necessarily like to put their money towards these kinds of things, but it's really important if you're trying to keep your pond healthy and clean. So this is a great idea, and I'm just about done here. This is a great idea from the Falmouth Pond Coalition. If you're looking for a stormwater project idea for your neighborhood or your pond group, you can engage your membership, volunteers, students, and do an inventory and inspect those catch basins. The Falmouth Pond Coalition came up with a little field checklist, and they go out with a measuring tape and a flashlight. And not only do they mark exactly where the system is, but they measure down to see how far down from the top is the sediment. And then they report those findings to the town DPW so that they can prioritize their cleaning. Often we found, and they found around their ponds, that the catch basins just had never been touched. And again, they might have been on private roads, but if you don't know that the system's not functioning, by the time you get the next big rain, it's too late. So I just thought this was we're gonna be promoting this around for other pond organizations because I think it's just an easy and fun thing to do, which really produces some good information. And thank you. You've already mentioned my guidelines for Cape Friendly Landscapes, or APCC's guidelines, and that is available. You can also just read it online. You don't have to buy one, but a a lot of the issues that I mentioned tonight are included in that. And with that, we can have a discussion.
Kristin, I have learned so many things from your talk that I had no idea about. The caterpillars and the milkweed is just the tip of the iceberg. I'd like to open it up to questions if we can do that. I've got a few, but I'll let everybody else go first. So shall we put the people back on the screen, and or do you want to leave that up?
Yep, no, I
Let's
can
see.
stop sharing.
Okay.
There you go.
Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I've got one. The porous pave or the percrete that you mentioned, is that
Yep.
that available locally? Is there a place we can go to look at purchasing something like that?
Percrete is Cape Cod Ready Mix on Cape Cod. That is their, I don't know what the proper word is, not trademark, but it's their proprietary mix. There may be other concrete places that do a similar kind of mix, but they're located in Orleans on Cape Cod. There's also permeable asphalt. Some of the paving companies will do that if it's a big enough project because they have to add aggregate into it.
I've got a very tiny piece of
Yeah.
a parking area basically.
Uh-huh.
Is there something that you'd recommend that's reasonable, that's local, for a very small? I can do this myself, but is there a place nearby that I could possibly pick something up like this and install it myself?
That's a good question. When we put in our our porous pave, we had a company from off Cape that came and did it. There was nobody on the Cape. Trevor's not doing that work anymore. I'd have to find out who is, because you really need to have, I don't know where you'd get the materials if you didn't go through a certified, whatever you call them,
Well,
somebody who
I can
handles
look it
that
up.
stuff.
Is there a generic term I should just use if I'm going to Google it and find something?
Yeah, porous pave.
Okay.
That's the trademark name
Okay.
of that material. I think if you just looked up permeable concrete
There you go.
or permeable, depends what type of material you're looking for. And again, these permeable applications are when you do need to have a hard surface. There's still nothing wrong with having a gravel or gravel shell driveway. It's, we had to put a handicap space in, so instead of putting asphalt, we went with the porous pave. And again, for those areas where somebody needs parking, I don't know.
Okay.
Or you like the way the porous pavers look. Ideal Pavers is a permeable paver company off Cape.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Ramona, see you first.
Thank you. We have an area around of new construction where we basically have sand on the surface. And we've been considering trying to start clover on it rather than grass. Is some of the clover application for lawns, do those get us anywhere? Is it a better choice?
So I would say probably stay away from the micro clover because it's expensive and it's very fussy. I understand it has a very narrow band of conditions that it likes. You can always use Dutch white clover. I'd probably mix it with some fescues, maybe not do straight clover. So that would be my suggestion, I guess.
We've
Problem
we've
with
also got,
clover, problem
okay.
with clover, as I understand it, is that it's fairly drought sensitive.
Is it?
And when
Yeah,
it
too.
dies, then it provides a venue for worse weeds to come in. So I've been reluctant to grow clover, but you may have better luck with it than I've had.
Well, I wonder if the fescue or something else, we're going to put in areas, the yard is ringed in just natural forest and we leave some standing dead when we can. But this area is like right around the construction zone and it's just naked sand right now. And we're trying to figure out what to get down there so we don't have erosion while the yard comes back, you know.
Yeah, yeah, probably clover. I would agree with Don. Probably clover in a tough spot like that. I'd probably just start with some drought tolerant fescues. I don't know. Jerry, do you have some ideas?
I was just going to
Don't know
suggest,
what it looks like.
depending on whether you're going to be constantly walking there or not. I mean, things like the bee balm, if you could, it grows fast, and goldenrod and things like that, and then you'd have lovely native wildflowers. You know, you could still have a pathway through it, but you could have, you know, like a wildflower garden, and they take off pretty fast.
Yep, goldenrod's really happy in the toughest of conditions. When we had that crispy summer 2 years ago, everything else was just like burnt to a crisp, but the goldenrod kept going, and so I let it go.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've got it down
Yeah.
here. That and Indian paintbrush here on the ocean is, you know, wonderful.
Hmm.
But I try and, you know, cultivate leave them in my meadow. You know, the Indian paintbrush and the goldenrod. I'm trying to cultivate them.
Lynn, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Kristin. That was just great. I loved all your visuals, very colorful and interesting to look at some of the other phases of caterpillar life that I might not see all that often. Has the APCC have any, like we were talking about the pavers and porous pavers? I mean, when you're just driving by all these commercial parking lots, it seems like maybe the APCC or other organizations could put more pressure to try to require better ecological friendly means of even better drainage systems, more porous surfaces, instead of everything being hardtop. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, the difficult part with doing a permeable surface is that they're more expensive, right? So permeable concrete's probably the cheapest of all of those that I showed. Other things get more expensive, and if you're doing parking lots or commercial areas, you can do a permeable asphalt, but again, it's extra care. They all require maintenance because you've got, or a different kind of maintenance or different care. You can't, the permeable asphalt or the permeable porous pave that we have, you have to be careful that you don't spill any soil on it. Well, it would still function as a parking lot, but once the crevices get filled in, like if there were to be an accident or sanding, if they needed to sand a driveway, or did it by mistake, that would be a problem. So, but I'd say the biggest thing is the extra expense. Asphalt is still the doggone cheapest thing to put down. So part of green infrastructure is dealing with the stormwater that comes off of those asphalt parking lots. And so rain gardens can easily be installed, and that's kind of one of the things that we've been pushing for. We've also been working a lot around boat ramps and doing ways to capture stormwater further up the hill. A lot of it is not necessarily, well, it's all about infiltration, but doing it through green infrastructure, capture systems with native plants helps take up nutrients and again bind stuff with the sediments before so it doesn't get into the waterways. So I would say yeah, it's hard to make people or make anybody do the permeable concrete or any of those things just because they're so much more expensive. But if we can deal with the stormwater instead of just doing a catch basin and sinking it into one big slug in the ground, instead spreading it out over a rain garden along a parking lot, that's a much better way to do it. we've done that in Chatham and a couple of town properties.
I think
It
that
also
the
looks better.
Heritage Gardens, when
Yes.
they redid their parking area and everything, they did a beautiful job with the rain gardens and the catch basins and things like that. In fact, I think they got some award for that.
Yeah, that's a great example. Horsley and Witten designed that. That's a great example. Thanks.
Mhm.
Any other questions? Oops.
Good. Any other questions?
I have a quick one. You showed a picture early on with the native plants that had a tall purple flower in the background. Was that ironweed or what was that? Some kind of veronica?
Trying to think. I think the only thing I had was Joe Pye weed at some point in one of our gardens.
Hmm. No, this was really purple. It wasn't because I have lots of Joe Pye weed. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
I
sorry.
had been growing it along the side of our yard. I put it there first in which was along the driveway, and it was basically gravel, from where it just dropped off. And it grew very nicely. And then I started planting along the road, like you said. Don's been digging me a bed each year. And I dug up some of the Joe Pye weed and stuck it in there. And I mean, this thing grew 7 feet tall and had blossoms that were a foot in diameter or more. I mean, it was magnificent. Where it's growing marginally, it's attractive, but this was just magnificent. That, and I planted a yellow, I think it's like a wild sunflower, a perennial sunflowers, or a helianthus. The two of them side by side just took over this garden. They're
Cool.
just stunning in the fall, late
Yep.
summer.
Yep. Yeah, I've seen some of those really tall Joe Pies, and they are pretty impressive. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I have a climate change question. I heard probably 3, 4 years ago that the ocean was the place where carbon dioxide has been stored to our advantage for years and years and years. And this person, and I don't even remember who it was so long ago, said that the ocean was reaching its capacity. And I'm wondering if you've heard anything about that, because with what's happening with CO2, if you look at the graph, it's far exceeding what people thought it would attain. And that could be because the ocean is no longer as efficient in sequestering the carbon dioxide. Have you heard anything about that? I haven't been able to get a straight answer from anybody in the climate area on that one, but I keep asking.
Yeah, I haven't, but I do recall, and maybe some of you heard the NPR story about whales and whale poop and how important whales are to the whole ocean ecosystem and
Yeah.
phytoplankton. And, it's like any ecosystem, things get out of balance and they don't function the way they have evolved to well before us. So
I have one more question along that ilk, unfortunately. It's about sewers. And everybody says that sewers are the best way to deal with waste pollutants in the water systems. But on the other hand, it takes a fair amount of energy to pump the water, and it takes a fair amount of energy to treat the water so that it can go back. And I've heard more frequently now that sewering is not as eco-friendly as we would like it to be. What's your take on that?
well, I can tell you what our executive director, who's a water guy, used to work for DEP, and this is his bailiwick. At least on Cape Cod, we can't address our nitrogen issues without sewering. Our alternative systems that are nitrogen reducing systems can't get it down low enough to really to address what we need to. And then with our seasonal living, it makes those individual alternatives, nitrogen reducing septic systems don't function as well as if they were year round. So we can't, you know, we can use those in those places where we can't get sewer to, but for the Cape, we need to sewer. And it does, you know, you'd like to, I understand, I've heard the arguments about it being a water-based system too. You think about having to use water, you know, and that seems wasteful, although we do inject it back into the ground after it's been treated. But the practicality and the reality is we're not going to get people to do urine diverting toilets across Cape Cod or much of anywhere else unless you happen to live in the boonies and that's your thing. We can't get people to stop fertilizing their lawns. I don't think we can tell them that they have to urinate in a different location than they, you know, and then have somebody come pick it up and take it away. I mean, it's just, it doesn't fit into our, that's an extreme, but a lot of people, there are a group of people on the Cape that are promoting that. And, you know, again, for some people, but that's not going to answer for the whole population. So we just believe that sewering is the only way that we're going to tackle our nutrient problem.
Yeah, I'm afraid
it's not
that's
gonna
true. We had Brian Horsley a couple of months ago, and he, of course, is
Oh, there's a urine
Yes.
diverting guy.
in promoting the add-ons to the septic
I know Brian.
septic
Yeah.
tanks. Yeah, you know Brian. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Kristin, can you, for restoring a vegetative buffer, can you give us a few plants that you would suggest that are more readily available? I know, you know, like I have plethora and I keep moving, you know, spreading that runs quite nicely, etc. And I've used some other things, you know, some other native plants, but I'm talking about other shrubs and other particularly good native plants.
Any of the viburnums, you know,
Viburnums.
for a while there, you know, we've got the leaf beetle, the viburnum leaf beetle, and everybody freaked out several years ago when that showed up because it can decimate viburnums, but it's not a reason not to plant them. If, you know, anyway, I think there's a great variety of viburnums that can be planted. And of course, then they're great for birds too, between arrowwood or high bush cranberry. Those are all good shrubs. And again, they'll fill in. It all depends again on whether you're working in some shade. Inkberry is a great shrub if you've got partial shade. It's a great native shrub. And it comes in cultivars. So if you're trying to do a naturalized buffer, you'd want to try to find a straight species. A lot of the cultivars they sell in the nurseries are compact, you know, because everybody wants things neat and tidy. But inkberry is and it's a great hedge plant too. If you were doing a hedge or a hedgerow, it's a great alternative to doggone privet. It's everywhere in the world here.
Right. Yeah, I just have been started planting the red berry, the holly, the winterberry.
Winterberry, oh yeah, nice. Yep, very nice.
And I like that.
Kristin, have the nurseries started backing off from getting the various colors that people want and going more to native plants? Do you see a trend there, or are they still interested in having red, white, and blue flowers all over the place that are basically anathema to bees and pollinators?
Yeah,
Do you see any hope there?
I've been doing it, I guess, been involved long enough that yes, I'm seeing a change. At least on the Cape, there are a lot more nurseries that carry native plants. Gosh, and you know, now you've got blue stem natives in Norwood that is strictly native plants. Those women are doing a great job. I heard there's a couple other native nurseries that are being planned somewhere in the southeast here. But I'd say all of our retailers now carry a lot more native plants than they used to. They're realizing that, I mean, fortunately, we've created the demand. That's what we kept saying for years. Please, when you go to your nursery, ask for natives. And I think
Yeah.
the message is finally getting through. So now we need more growers. We don't have enough growers. And then it gets even more complicated because growers are often growing by tissue culture or by, so
Mhm.
genetically, a lot of plants are just the same. And so that's not so good for our biodiversity. So we need more growers to grow by seed. And there's a shortage of seed. So it's a very interesting, it's not so easy, but I think there are a lot of people working on this and a lot of homeowners and landscapers who are on board.
Well, you're doing a good job educating people, and I think that's really, really, really the key. And I gotta hand it to you. It's a tough one, and but the Cape seems to be responding pretty well, considering from what I've seen. Any other questions, people?
Thank you.
Wow, this was a really good session, and I hope that in the future we'll be able to share more of our common interests of diversity and water and native.
Yep.
So keep in touch, Kristin. This has been very,
Absolutely.
very informative. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank
so
you very
much,
much.
Kristin.
Thanks for all the work you're doing.
It was great.
Excellent.
Thank you, Kristen.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for all.
Thank you all for
Thanks to all of
joining
you
us.
for coming.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.